Saturday, the 18th of May, 1968.
This reading on page 70 of the supplementary prayer book is a prayer which we often read in the synagogue. Particularly am I happy that we use it this morning in the presence of its distinguished author, Professor Abraham Joshua Heschel. This is one of several prayers that are included in the Reconstructionist prayer book by Professor Heschel, and we have added two in the last few years in the supplementary prayer book, and this one we are reading today. I don't know whether Dr. Heschel would recognize it as a prayer. It is, in fact, taken from a book which was not meant to be liturgy, his book published by the Jewish Publication Society of America on the prophets. And when I read that book, this chapter, or this section of this chapter, cried to be used as part of the liturgy on the Sabbath, and we have adapted it accordingly. I hope he doesn't object. And it is read responsively to indicate that the sections read by the Rabbi articulate in a modern idiom, hopefully relevant to the modern condition, what the ancient prophet equally relevantly in a bygone age and in an archaic idiom expressed about the need for prophecy in the approach to social action. I think I gave the congregation before my definition of the Schlemazel. You know, the old definition of Schlemiel and Schlemazel is that in a restaurant, the man who spills the coffee over you is the Schlemiel, and the one who gets the coffee on him is the Schlemazel. And to that traditional definition, I added the one of the Indian, who, when there is a fight between tribes and there is a peace conference, an arrow is broken to symbolize that peace has been made. The Indian whose arrow is always broken, that is a Schlemazel. Now, a few weeks ago, I gave a sermon on the issues of Columbia, and I would like to suggest a new definition for Schlemazel in connection with the Rabbi, that I gave an appraisal on the basis of the information that I had at my disposal at that time. I don't think I would change it radically. Obviously, if one has been beaten by a policeman, one looks at the Columbia situation differently from one who reads the news media. One of the themes of the sermon was a suggestion which I have not seen fit to change my view about, that one of the reasons for unrest on the campuses throughout the world, one of the reasons is the depersonalization which has taken place in the multiversity, because the university today is so much bigger than it was, and when you get a university over a certain number of students, something happens to the way in which that university is administered and to the students who are administered. And I blamed the computer, in part, only one explanation, one reason, one factor, the computer, for having been partially responsible for what is happening on the campuses. Now, within a matter of days, I received two irate letters. One was from a student of Columbia who had been in shul that morning and resented the manner in which I had treated the Columbia dimension. The other was from an executive of IBM who resented about the way I treated the computer. So I have a new definition of the Schlemazel, a rabbi who preaches a sermon on Columbia, blaming the computer when you have a student of Columbia and a computer expert in the congregation at one and the same time. Now, I met with the Columbia student this week, and we had a very disturbing conversation from my part. We all have to make moral decisions on the basis of imperfect knowledge. If some of us had waited until we knew every last fact about what was going on in Vietnam before we decided to say something about it, we would never have opened our mouths, because you can never know everything about everything in the modern world. Moral decisions today have got to be made on imperfect knowledge, and that in itself is something which is agony for the ethically sensitive soul. And I think the Columbia situation is also a case in point. No one knows all the facts all together at the same time. Everybody has a part of the facts, and I think everyone is making up legitimately a moral decision on the basis of not entirely perfect knowledge. And from the conversation that I had with this charming young lady, who I'm happy to see again in our congregation this morning, we made our peace, something arose which disturbed me about the problem of facing students today. They are not professional politicians, and yet whenever there is disturbance and unrest on the campus, professional politicians always come in to stir up. What, she asked me, is a student who is trying to do a decent job of academic work to do when there are serious moral issues at stake, and yet one does not have the time to become a professional politician? I didn't know the answer to that. And the conversation in general left me feeling disturbed that we are living in a world where the best of us have to compromise. We are not professional politicians, and therefore we all have to have an agenda of moral priorities. And it's a horrible thing to have to think that we have agendas of moral priorities, because all moral issues ought to be equally, absolutely important and challenging, and yet we don't have the time. We are parents or husbands or wives or children or students or teachers or rabbis, even rabbis, and we all have to have priorities, and yet the concept of moral priority is an obscenity. It would have been, at least to the prophets. And therefore we are grateful to have prayers such as these, or readings or meditations such as these, which should make us all feel very uncomfortable, should make all of us feel a little less smug than we have organized properly our agenda of moral priorities, should make us feel there is an eternal standpoint from which our own limited compromises and limited half-hearted attempts to make a better society and a better community and better individuals of ourselves, in terms of which, from the point of view of eternal divinity, our moral shortcomings, our moral failings, our moral compromises are judged. Now, of course, the prophet is a very uncomfortable man to be with, because he is not satisfied with a moral agenda, nor is he satisfied with a series of moral priorities. Everything has to be done, it has to be done well, and it has to be done right now. And we can't live this way. We cannot live this way. We have to rest, we have to take it easy, we have to have a vacation, we have to go out and have dinner, we have to go to a movie. We can't take all the misery in the world. But the prophet doesn't want to know about human nature. The prophet only speaks to us of the imperative coming from God. And therefore it is my privilege to ask you to join me reading this quotation mark prayer, meditation, reminding us of the challenge of the prophet, from an author of this prayer who in his own personal life has been an exemplar of showing, within the limits of the realities of modern life, that there can be no series of moral priorities, but that the man who strives to follow in the footsteps of the prophets must put his body where his heart and his ideal aspirations is at all times and on all occasions. On page 70 in our supplementary prayer book, please join in the readings of the indented sections for the congregation. Those who have a sense of beauty know that a stone sculptured by an artist's poetic hands has an air of loveliness, that a beam charmingly placed utters a song. The prophet's ear, however, is attuned to a cry imperceptible to others. A clean house or a city architecturally distinguished may yet fill the prophet with distress. We pause in the middle of civil disorders, student riots, international unrest, rising cost of living, bad weather, and other sundry woes, to eulogize the passing of a beautiful tradition which died at this time of the year among masses of world Jewry. I refer to the tradition of reciting during the months that separate Pesach from Shavuot, the reciting of the Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers. This tradition is still alive among Orthodox Jewry, but among the rest of us who tend to talk about Judaism rather than live it, it has died. Talking about Judaism rather than living it is like talking about love and not loving. A girl once told me many years ago that the boys who talk most about love are worst at it. And in the spirit of the prophet Hosea, who saw in his own love for a recalcitrant wife a reflection of the love of God for wayward Israel, I took the girl's comments very seriously as grave theological communication. Halavai oti azavu v'et torati shamaru, runs an old rabbinic saying, would that my people would leave me, God alone, and occupy themselves or observe the Torah, which I suppose could be a description of that song in My Fair Lady, the young lady who says, don't talk about it, show me. God says to the Jewish people, Halavai oti azavu v'torati shamaru. Don't talk about it, show me, in terms of actual quality of Jewish living. Not all the traditions which have fallen into desuetude should have fallen thus into desuetude, and I think the reciting of the Ethics of the Fathers, as it is known, this section of traditional literature, during the summer months, is one that perhaps should not, but it was unavoidable. It was, however, in its heyday, a rich custom, and one which we non-Orthodox Jews should commemorate at least archaeologically, if not existentially and experientially. Custom was among Ashkenazim to recite one chapter a week at the afternoon service, after Mincha on every Shabbat, between Passover and Rosh Hashanah. This was the Ashkenazi custom. Now it is odd that we have a paradox. See how far I've gone from the custom, I even forgot the length of the recital. And the other times of the year there is an additional section of Psalms which supplement the afternoon reading on the Sabbath. Now it is a strange paradox nowadays that among many Jews who studied Jewish tradition in Hebrew school or a Talmud Torah or even a yeshiva when they were young, one of the few relics of a knowledge of Rabbinic Judaism, Rabbinic Torah, clusters around their recollections of Pirkei Avot. They often will not be able to quote to you anything from Midrash or from Talmud or from Mishnah or from Gemara, but they will remember, because of this ancient custom of reciting Pirkei Avot on Saturday afternoon, they will remember some odd quotations. And indeed, the book, the order is full of quotable quotes, like, Im ein kemach, ein Torah. Im ein Torah, ein kemach. If there is no flour, that is to say, if we don't have the material wherewithal, if we can't meet the budget, there can be no Torah. On the other hand, if there's no Torah, there can be no kemach, or know how to reply to the non-believer, or Hillel's famous saying, Al tifrosh min hatzibur, separate not thyself from the congregation. You will find there are many Jews who have left behind the traditional home and the traditional method of Jewish education, which belonged to their youth. And they will still remember as Jewish learning little gobbets, little quotations from Pirkei Avot. Yet actually the custom of reading the Ethics of the Fathers on Shabbat afternoon was to avoid studying Torah. To avoid studying the Torah. The Gaon Sa'adya from the 10th century and Gaon Sar Shalom, quoting earlier sources, say that the custom of reciting these chapters on Sabbath afternoons during the summer was instituted by the rabbis to commemorate the death of Moses, who according to tradition died on Sabbath afternoon. And tradition enjoins Chacham Shemet Kol Midrashot Betelim. When a sage, a disciple of the law, Jewish scholar, dies, all the colleges and seminaries and the yeshivot are shut down. This is a strange idea for the modern Jew, who often, at least in our circles, equates Jewish education with pain and not with joy. I suggest you tell your children that there was a time in Judaism when the joy of studying Torah was deemed to be so great that you were forbidden to study when you were mourning the death of a near one and dear one, and the death of one who is regarded as the near and dear one to all Jews, the Chacham. And therefore, between Mincha and Mariv, which was the time traditionally when Moses died, the Jews were not permitted to study. However, you can't have Jews just sitting around doing nothing, because they will gossip, slander a little, pull people to pieces a little, so the rabbis had to give them something to do. And the decision was that they should daven, not pray, mark you, not study, mark you, God forbid, not study, but daven, a section of traditional rabbinic literature. I tell you, Miki Amcha Yisrael, what other people? Can you imagine davening a chunk of John Stuart Mill, or Locke, or Berkeley, or Hume, or Kant? Only the Jew could use this as a means of not indulging in the joy which comes from Talmud Torah. You daven. You know, there's a story about the man who didn't have a ticket to go to shul on Yom Kippur, so the man stops him at the door. You can't go in, you don't have a ticket. I've got to speak to my cousin who's sitting in the front row. All right, you can go in, but don't let me catch you davening. So also the rabbi stood by, as it were, on Saturday afternoon between Mincha and Maariv, said, you can daven, but don't let me catch you studying. In other words, don't enjoy Pirkei Avot, because Moshe Rabbeinu died at this time. What was normally learnt was on this occasion davened, recited. Pirkei Avot is the only complete order or tractate of rabbinic literature which is used liturgically. There is a chapter used in the prayer book on the eve of the Sabbath to discuss the different substances which may be used for the Sabbath lamps. This is a complete order of the Mishnah. The rabbis, of course, were rarely satisfied with the giving of only one reason. By the way, this custom of not studying rabbinic literature, but using parts of rabbinic literature on occasions of mourning, which don't give you any joy, but only make you feel miserable, is echoed also on Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av, when the Jew mourns for the destruction of the temple, and one is not permitted to study Torah, but one is, according to tradition, permitted to study certain sections of rabbinic literature which describe the destruction of the temple, and which therefore are not regarded as Talmud Torah, but in a sense mourning. The rabbis were rarely satisfied with giving of only one reason for anything. So the death of Moses is only one reason as to why the Jews recite Pirkei Avot on Saturday afternoon. According to the Machzor Vitri, approximately 1100, a liturgical compendium, the masses, it is said in that book, come to the synagogue for the reading of the Torah on Saturday afternoons, and since they are already in synagogue, because they have to come to synagogue, at least while they're there, let us give them something morally edifying. It's a very interesting point, even in the 20th century, and a remarkable concession in the Middle Ages for popular feeling. Now, for those of you who don't know what Mishnah is, very briefly, the 5 books of Moses, or the Pentateuch, which we have resting in the Ark, were accepted by the Jewish people in the middle of the 5th pre-Christian century as their constitution in the framework of a theocracy. The Pentateuch, the Torah, the 5 books of the Torah was henceforth to be their constitution. In the year 444 before the Common Era, under the leadership of Ezra the scribe, the Jewish people accepted the Torah as their constitution. But the Torah is a relatively small book, and the laws and customs which it contains have to be elaborated in order for it to provide a true means of living. And in subsequent centuries, the commentary on the Torah grew apace. Those sections of the Torah which were narrative or history gave birth to a vast corpus of literature known as Midrash Agadah. All those stories about Abraham going into his father's business and, arguing with his father about making idols, and then getting a big idol and putting a hammer into the hand of the idol, and the idol knocks all the other idols to pieces, and Abraham's father comes home and says, who did this? And Abraham says, the big idol. Don't be stupid, don't you know idols can't do anything? And Abraham says, well, why do you worship idols? This story is not found in the Torah. It is found in the embellishment of the Torah, as most of the Agadah, the narrative, the rabbis, as it were, read between the lines. Another vast corpus of literature was developed out of the legal sections of the 5 books of Moses. The laws, which in themselves are cryptic and elliptic, are developed and expanded into Midrash Halakha, Halakha meaning walking. And to such a time that the literature became so vast that the halachic Midrash was sifted, and the association of the law with the original text, which was the source of the law, was removed and divided. And the laws themselves became systematized into various books of law, or mishnayot, which simply means teaching or repetition. There were many collections of Mishnah, but the classical collection was the one edited by Yehuda Hanasi, Judah the Prince, who died approximately the year 219 of the Common Era. So when we refer to the Mishnah, we refer to the 6 orders of that collection of Jewish law edited or redacted by Judah the Prince, the end of the 2nd post-Christian century, and of this Mishnah, which is in 6 sections, the 4th section, which is Nezikin, which deals with torts, civil law, and damages, includes the Pirkei Avot, the ethics of the fathers, or the chapters of the fathers. So, of course, the question is asked, why does a Seder, why does a collection of chapters which deal with ethics belong in a book of criminal and civil law? Maimonides answers this question as follows in the introduction to his Seder Zeraim. He says, "Lefi she'ein adam tzarich lezeh hadavar kemo hadayanim." Judges, more than any other people in the world, need ethics. She'amei ha'aretz kishelo yihiyu balei musar ein ha'hezek l'chol hehamon. When the Am Haratzim, or the ordinary people, Maimonides, by the way, was a great snob, the vulgar, the hoi polloi, when they behave unethically, it doesn't matter so much. They only harm themselves, the common people, when they behave unethically. It redounds upon them. Aval hashofet, kishelo yihyeh bal musar v'tzanua. But when a judge is unethical and behaves in a disgraceful fashion, yazik liatzmo v'yazik livnei adam, he not only harms himself, he harms those with whom he comes into contact in the exercise of his judicial role. As a matter of fact, when we talk about Pirkei Avot as the ethics of the fathers, it is to some extent a misnomer. Because in fact, the ethics of the fathers is a guide not to the ordinary man in the street ethics, but is particularly geared to the ethics of the judge. Comes from an age when the rabbis were jurists. Again, we have to think back to the pre-modern period when our ancestors did not live in two civilizations, but only one civilization, when the Jewish people was a state within a state, and the rabbis exercised exclusive control over the conduct of the life of the people, with the exception of some few areas which were in the hands of the secular, or rather the government of the country as a whole. Now, much of the Torah, much of the law found in the old compendia of law no longer is valid today. When the temple fell, a vast section of Jewish law became inoperative. And with the emancipation of the modern Jew, another vast section of law became inoperative for the modern Jew. Theoretically, Orthodox Jews are still supposed to litigate before Jewish courts of law, but I don't know of any cases of litigation of this kind. I imagine there are a few, but by and large, even among Orthodox Jews, who are the supporters of the law, only a small proportion of the traditional 613 mitzvot can today be kept, even if you want to keep them. I think it has been estimated something like 37 or 38. So the law has dwindled from being a vast river which coped with all problems for a total community's life, down to marriage and divorce, conversion, proselytization, and the ritual concerning the Jewish home, festivals, and Sabbaths. Now, because the rabbi in the olden day was called upon to function as a jurist or as an interpreter of the law, clearly he needed ethical maxims to guide him in this activity. And from an age when the rabbi exercised juristic power, which he no longer possesses in the modern world outside of Israel, and even in Israel that juristic power is open to serious question, we have a book which includes many recommendations to judges how to behave, who not to talk to, how to consider the people who come in front of you. And if you read this book, you have to realize that it was written by rabbis and originally for rabbis who were going to judge people in all important matters concerning everyday life. In addition, however, it also includes lofty moral insights and wise words. Now, each chapter in the prayer book is prefaced by a paragraph of Mishnah from Sanhedrin, which is also from the same order, from Nezikin. Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek l'olam haba. This is read each week. A chapter is read, and before each chapter is read, this little section is read. All Israel have a part in the world to come. As it is said, thy people shall be all righteous. Wishful thinking, halavai vaita. And each chapter's recitation is ended by a dictum of Rabbi Hanania ben Akashya, whose date I was unable to ascertain. I imagine he lived about the 2nd or 3rd century, the post-Christian era. Ratzah HaKadosh Baruch Hu lezakot et Yisrael, lefichach hirba lahem Torah u'mitzvot. God wanted to make Israel able to acquire merit. Therefore he multiplied to them Torah and precepts. You want to know, Rabbi Hanania says, why it's so hard to be a Jew, why there are so many things a Jew may do or mustn't do or has to do or can't do. The reason is that God was so anxious to give the Jewish people zechiyah, merit. He gave them plenty of mitzvahs, so there'll be plenty of opportunity for them to pile up a heap of good deeds for the world to come. Now, this statement, the date of which I have not been able to ascertain, is almost certainly a polemic against Christianity, and especially against St. Paul, who, as you may remember, had great difficulty in being an Orthodox Jew, like so many of us, and he claimed that the law was sent by God against the Jew and not for the Jew. That the law made people feel conscious of their shortcomings and their imperfections. And in a sense, it was a kind of a punishment that the Jew had the law. Only an imperfect man would have a law with all these mitzvot, which you couldn't keep properly, and therefore every time you didn't do what you ought to do, you brought in Shabbos a little too late, or you took it out a little too early, or you didn't eat what you should eat, or something, you were guilty and guilty and guilty. This was no way to live. Paul said, I'm finished with all this. Get rid of the Torah, faith in Jesus. And only the man who doesn't believe in Jesus needs this burden of the law on him, because he's an imperfect man. And Hanania says, punkt verkehrt, my dear St. Paul. Whether he knew of him or whether he knew of the argument, clearly he has this in mind. The multiplicity of mitzvot in the Torah is not against the Jew. Don't you say such a horrible thing, Paul. God loves the Jewish people, and that is why we have all these mitzvot, in order to give the Jew a more and more opportunity to show that he wants to serve God, but also to claim a little bit of yichus and credit and have something chalked up for him in the kingdom up on high, which is as it should be. Now, why should these two liturgical paragraphs be added at the beginning and the end? I'm going to give, of course, a homiletical reason. In liturgy, it's common practice, as for example, when traditional Jews recited the Psalms, you had a little liturgical piece which led up to, and a little liturgical piece which led away from the introduction of an extraneous section of literature into the prayer book. Now, there is a liturgical value, but one homiletical explanation which I think has more than a homiletical import for us today is as follows. Some of these ethical injunctions in Pirkei Avot are very demanding in their ethical intensity. The average man in the street might be pardoned for thinking that these injunctions, emor me'at va'aseh harbe, do a lot, say a little, be a man of action rather than a man of words, and always be cheerful, and always say good morning to the other person first, and don't let him say good morning to you first. Somehow, the average man in the street might think that these ethical injunctions are only for saints, for rabbis, for teachers, for the professional virtuosi of society, and not for the average man in the street who has to go down to Times Square or to Wall Street and make a living for himself and can't be bothered with all these ethical injunctions. I mean, take an injunction like Antignos ish socho. Be ye not like servants who minister their master on condition of receiving a reward, but be like servants who minister their master without any anticipation of a reward. Gewalt, have you been in the labor market recently? I mean, this kind of selflessness doesn't even exist in the professional sphere anymore. I mean, it's not just a question of a plumber. We're talking about the professional, white-collar professionals, where you can look hard, the teaching profession and the rabbinical profession, to get this kind of service, shelo almanot lekabel pros, not with any ulterior motives. So the average man in the street says, well, I'm reading it and it's very nice, but it's fayenim. It's for the other man. To which the liturgical introduction says, Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek l'am haba. Every single Jew, there is no professional class of ethicists in the Jewish people. Don't get out of your ethical problems and responsibilities by thinking that there are some people paid for you. You know what happens in some Orthodox synagogues? And occasionally I've heard overtones of it here, but very rarely, thank God. The rabbi has to be frum vicariously for the members. As long as the rabbi wears tefillin, and the rabbi eats kosher, and the rabbi is a shomer Shabbos, the congregation, because they pay the check, feel that they don't have to. Vicarious atonement. In some synagogues, you don't even have to come to shul to say Kaddish for your father. You can pay somebody to do it. Now, there's no such thing as vicarious Judaism. Kol Yisrael. I'm not going to be orthodox for you. If you want to be frum, you have to be frum for yourselves. You want to be ethical for yourselves. No one can do it for you. Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek la'olam haba. Every Jew has a portion in the world to come. And every Jew must strive to the utmost of his limits in order to be a Jew in terms of the ethical injunctions. Judaism is not just for the intellectuals, as we learned at our annual general membership meeting earlier this week. It is not only for the learned and the spiritual, it is for all men. And secondly, and this is a problem which occurred to the homiletical commentator on the liturgical conclusion of the Ethics of the Fathers, but is very relevant to the modern condition also. What does it mean? Ratzah HaKadosh Baruch Hu lezakot et Israel. God wanted to give the Jews a lot of merit by giving them many mitzvot. We read the Ethics of the Fathers and we see that many of the injunctions there aren't really Jewish. They're just ethical. And often people come to synagogue today and say, but Rabbi, why can't we belong to the Ethical Culture Society? I could call it the Jewish Ethical Culture Society, there's so many Jews there. Why not the Ethical Culture Society? After all said and done, if I understand you correctly, you talk ethics the way they talk ethics. So isn't that the most important thing? All the other things are really extraneous and irrelevant. In other words, as long as I am ethical, I can be a perfectly good Jew. Why do I have to come to shul? The Ethical Culture Society is near and it doesn't cost so much. And the answer to that is, Ratzah HaKadosh Baruch Hu lezakot et Yisrael lefichach, that ethics do not exist in a vacuum. It is false logic to assume that because societies like the Ethical Culture Society can lop off ethics from their ethnic matrix, that this is how ethics grow. Ethics do not grow on Central Park West in ad hoc societies for the upper classes, the aristocracy and the intelligentsia. Ethics grow within a people and within a family. Ethics grow with father and mother and husband and wife and child and sister and brother. Ethics grow within the framework of a people. It is the reciprocity of the family and the people, which Judaism considers as a family of families, and the world as a family of families, in which ethics grow. Ethics are universal, but they are refracted in different civilizations through the ethnicity. And that is why, as a Jew, we don't just talk about freedom. We talk about freedom refracted through Pesach, with the 4,000 years of Jewish experience and the reconstruction of the concept of Pesach. The Jew is not merely a liberal, if he is a liberal. He is liberal within the framework of the ethnic context of Jewish tradition. And that is why the answer to those who speak of the ethics of the fathers is including merely ethical injunctions for which you don't have to be a member of the Jewish people. The answer to that is that only against the backdrop of the historic depth of a people are we afforded the true significance of ethical insights. And moreover, we are only afforded the strength in the present to work for those ethical insights if we have the dimension of the culture behind us. We live, according to the psalmist, for 70 years and 10, or even by reason of strength 80 years. And most of that time we spend eating and sleeping and drinking and pursuing our other pursuits. And the amount of time left in the life of any individual man for doing good work and good deeds is perilously and pitifully limited. And therefore, if we only gather with other men in terms of an ad hoc situation, within the framework of our own limited, miserable, petty little span of life, we can do nothing. And the worst tragedy in the modern world is to be made afraid and fearful and lose hope in the face of all the efforts that are needed to make of the world a better place. And the Jew derives hope and faith and courage not just from 1968 and current ethical challenges to freedom, but because he belongs to a people that has been moving towards a godly drenched understanding of freedom for 4,000 years, and the knowledge that we are part of one big, vast, ongoing creative process is what gives us the strength to pass on the little and modest contribution, granted, that we can make within a larger ethnic framework to those who will follow us. Ratzah HaKadosh Baruch Hu lezakot et Israel. And it is my belief that the Jew who goes down to Mississippi as a Jew and not just as an ethical culturist, and the Jew who fights for truth and justice at Columbia University as a Jew and not just as an ethicist, brings the full weight of 4,000 years of Jewish culture and the whole of the Jewish people with him when he acts accordingly. I am not selling short ethical action on any level, but for the Jew, the most potent ethical behavior is within the framework of his people. Am I misjudging this congregation when I speak of Pirkei Avot and its recitation as a thing of the past? Should I ask for a show of hands as to how many people are going to recite Pirkei Avot this afternoon? I didn't even know which Perek was going to be recited this afternoon. It's Perek Dalet. Now, I mean, let's face it, I don't know in how many conservative congregations, how many Jews in America, outside of Spring Valley and the Orthodox sections of the community, will be reciting it this afternoon. So, if I do not misjudge you, and if I do, forgive me, I commiserate with you and with me. For here was a thing of beauty which has all but disappeared. I have the most moving recollections in my own childhood of davening Pirkei Avot with one eye on the English in the little singer's prayer book, which was the staple diet of Jewish life in Anglo Jewry. And I think it's rather sad that we don't have it in our Reconstructionist prayer book, even as a quotation from bygone age. The Reverend Travers Harford, distinguished Gentile scholar, who has edited Pirkei Avot, and the book is obtainable as a paperback today from any bookseller. It can be ordered from any bookseller today. It is available, I think, published by Schocken. Travers Harford writes, the custom of reading Pirkei Avot otherwise than in the regular course of study of the Mishnah began in the College of Surah, where it was read or recited on Sabbaths after Mincha. This was done at first only in the colleges, but the practice was later adopted in the synagogues and was already established there by the 11th century of the Common Era. Now I think that this recollection that the custom began in the college and ended up in every single Jewish home gives us some idea as to how we will evolve some equivalent for the reciting of Pirkei Avot in the modern world. I am not suggesting that we have an all-out campaign to get Jews to read Pirkei Avot on Saturday afternoon, which used to be Shabbos afternoon, and then became Saturday afternoon, and now is just Saturday PM, and has become almost as secular as the rest of the week. But Friday night is still an occasion when Jews still gather around the domestic hearth, and perhaps we need a functionally equivalent collection of texts, a Haggadah, a book which includes certain quotations from past and present to give the Jew some insight to what it means to being a Jew in the modern world. We express our togetherness in synagogue through our worship and study here. We express our adherence to Jewish values through the ritual observance and symbolic appurtenances of the home. But it seems to me there was something good about this davening or recitation of Pirkei Avot which shouldn't be left behind. And perhaps if some functional equivalent, some anthology, it'll have to be done very carefully, and originally it'll have to try it out in some few individual homes. Maybe we could reintroduce on the Friday evening Haggadah Shel Shabbat, whereby in addition to having a Jewish meal and the tablecloth and the candles and even singing Zimirot and reciting Birkat HaMazon, we express verbally within the context of the home a contemporary Jewish piety. This is more than the ability to manipulate a vocabulary of theology, or to talk coherently about God, or to have read the best Jewish books or have them lying on our coffee tables. What we are talking about is drawing on the vast expanse of our traditional literature, which unfortunately is lost to so many modern Jews, not trying to reach for the stars, but just having a very, very modest, small, but relevant anthology consisting of material culled from the past, because that is where Torah begins, but also taken from the present, from whatever source, written by whomsoever, for whatever is perfect and restores the soul is the Torah of the Lord for the modern man. We will wish to embody in action in the Jewish home this contemporary conception of Jewish piety in order for it to be able to spread out into the wider community and be a source of meaning to the wider Jewish world. And in conclusion, 2 comments from Pirkei Avot might be relevant. Asei Toratcha Keva, make a fixed time for the study of Torah, by which we mean for the study of what it is to be an authentic Jew. Asei Toratcha Keva, Al toma kshe'epane eshne, shema lo tipane. Do not say that I will study Torah when I have more time. It may well be that you will never have more time. And finally, lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, v'i ata ben chorin lehibatel mimena. You don't have to finish the work, but you at least have to make a beginning. Amen.